My world had recently gone deeply weird. One minute, life was life. Friends, family, school, church, the play I was rehearsing. The next minute, it had become fear and violence, and anarchic lawlessness that extended down to the level of the fundamental physical laws. A young adult novel from 1999, or my Tumblr post shortly after the election? You decide.
I looked into your eyes and saw a world that does not exist. I looked into your eyes and saw a world I wish I was in.
Welcome back to Everworld, where everything wants you dead and you probably deserve it. So last time, our quote-unquote heroes got caught in the middle of a war between the Vikings and the Aztecs. They got captured, escaped, recaptured, escaped, returned to the Aztec city themselves, and then left again. You know, I don't think I've ever seen a book with laps before. Finally, the four protagonists find Sena.
Senna.
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 Senna is a stimulant laxative. Senna.
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 Senna Comasco.
Beanbag chair.
Not long after finding her, a dragon shows up, presumably sent by the wizard Merlin. In order to protect herself, Sena enchants David and Christopher to protect her. Somehow. From a dragon. We pick up there with David and Christopher just kind of throwing rocks at this giant fire-breathing lizard that's way too large to be flying the way it is. Oh, and also it talks. It tries to brush the two boys off gently, saying it's not here for them, just the witch. April and Jaleel, who were not enchanted, make a run for it, but come across four men in glistening, medieval armor riding horses. The one in the lead is Galahad, one of the knights of King Arthur's Round Table, the illegitimate son of Sir Lancelot and Elaine of Corbinic, quester for the Holy Grail. Also racist against dragons. He's here to lay the hurt down on this dragon, even though the dragon is all, "Dude, I'm working for Merlin, chill out." The dragon runs off without Sena, and through all of this, April passes out, snapping back into our world. April is our narrator this time around, so the amount of uncomfortable male posturing decreases quite a bit. So just who is April as a character? Well, first off, in our inevitable comparison to Animorphs, it might be argued that April is a merging of Rachel and Cassie. April has a certain level of empathetic understanding and certain bright-eyed visions of the world, though instead of her focus being on animals and nature like Cassie, April's focus is on the arts. She's taking high school theater, and she's a major cinephile. She winds up on a date while in the real world, and this is the movie they go to see. And then, I had a date. Mario. He's gonna pick me up at 8. We were gonna see La Dolce Vita down in the city in a theater that showed old films. Oh, horrible first date movie. You should have gone with 8.5 instead. Well, I can safely say that I never expected a young adult book published by Scholastic in 1999 to make reference to Federico Fellini. I see Kay Applegate's been scoping out the Criterion Collection section at our local Barnes & Noble. It might be a little out there. You know, I too took high school theater at 16 and considered myself a bit of a cinephile, and maybe it's an unfair comparison, but I was still making my way through classic Hollywood and Stanley Kubrick at this time. I wasn't really at the Italian cinema level, let alone a Italian cinema as a date movie level. Granted, I lived in a hole in the ground in Idaho and didn't have access to Chicago's art house theaters, and I guess I shouldn't say that there were no 16-year-olds breaking out their dad's laserdisc of Umberto D back then, but I don't know. It still feels like an adult author scaling up a teenage character's tastes up to their own level. We'll get back to April's love of Turner Classic Movies in a bit. So that's how she's like Cassie. In terms of how she's like Rachel, well, for one, she's much more assertive and has no problem letting people know that she has a problem with them. Her relationship with Sena is largely antagonistic, despite being half-sisters. April will not give her an inch without cause. Even before all this happened, her relationship with Sana was very uneasy. We share a father. He had shared 2 women, my mother and Sana's. Sana came into our family at an early age. I was 4 and, as far as I could see, she was treated as an equal by my mom, despite the fact that she was the child of my dad's affair. They lied to me about it, of course, told me that Sana had always been my sister, that she had simply arrived in a different way, twisting my reality, trying to make me believe what I knew was wrong. Anything rather than explaining the truth. Later I understood. People being weak, people being wrong, that's part of life. And I tried to accept this new person, this strange little girl almost my age. But Sana didn't want acceptance. She wanted nothing from me. She was complete and apart. And for her, somehow, though I never came to grips with it, never faced it, the world was different. April isn't an adrenaline junkie like Rachel, but she will make good in a fight. She's also pretty social. Her circle is a bunch of theater nerds instead of gymnastics students, but it's not hard to imagine a pre-Yeerk invasion Rachel with a similar group of friends. April isn't huge on fashion, but she has a leg up on Cassie, so it's kind of a midpoint between the two. Of course, April is far more than just more spiritual Rachel or Cassie with a backbone. But once again, the crossover audience between Animorphs and Everworlds was knowingly huge, so these comparisons are inevitable. However, with the bump from PG to PG-13, we can cover certain aspects of character that Animorphs never really touched upon. For example, female sexuality. I went out with Mario, we saw the movie, we talked, I had a mocha and a panini made with hummus. We talked some more, we drove home. Mario stuck his tongue in my mouth and his hand inside my blouse. I stopped him. I don't even know why. There is a lot of sexual content in Everworld. No sex scenes themselves, this is still a PG-13 book, but sexuality, sexual acts, sexual feelings, sexual thoughts, it's ever present within Everworld. And that's still very much the case when April is our narrator. It's not terribly uncommon for books of this ilk to treat women as chaste characters and men as total horn dogs, but April is constantly finding herself dealing with attraction. In our world, she's dealing with the high school dating scene and sexual contact that she is not entirely unopposed to. She ends up saying no to the sexual advances of this here Mario fellow. Wait, did you take a guy named Mario to an Italian film? Is your next date going to be taking a guy named Yuri to see Seven Samurai? Anyway, it's implied that if April didn't feel certain obligations, she might be more sexually active. Obligations both in that she's dealing with this whole Everworld thing right now and that she's pretty religious. We don't get too much into it here, we don't know, say, what denomination of Christianity April belongs to, but we do get an amusing scene where April falls asleep in Everworld and wakes up screaming in church. Again, this is more lightly implied than anything, but her faith is still a factor when considering how sexually active she should be. Despite this, April still finds herself attracted to a lot of men, and frequently contemplates that attraction. A lot of that attraction this time around is aimed at Galahad, a literal knight in shining armor. The gaggle of knights stirred. Someone else was coming into the room. I stood on tiptoes to see. Galahad. And looking good, I admitted to myself. Looking very good, even without the armor. In Animorphs, there was a certain level of adolescent attraction. Young girls getting giddy over Jeremy Jason McCole. But Everworld bumps it up to the actual, I want to get touchy-feely with this hot medieval guy levels that you might expect from someone in their late teens. And it's really nice to have a book with a female lead displaying realistic sexual attraction without resulting in some kind of romance subplot. It's just April thinking, oh, I wouldn't mind getting into his pants, and then moving on, which is pretty true to real life. She is not some sexless damsel for the male character to protect, as much as Galahad's outdated code of chivalry tries to say otherwise, and she's not some male writer's attempts of grafting stereotypical male behaviors onto a woman. April's sexuality is realistic in general, and realistically feminine. After passing out after the dragon attack and spending some time in the real world, April wakes up to find herself in Galahad's castle. It turns out to just be a quick horse ride from the Aztec settlement, and I thought I had bad neighbors. She catches up with the boys, and it turns out Sana is still with them. More specifically, Sana is with David. David didn't laugh. His eyes clouded. He seemed uncertain. distracted. And then I saw the hand come sliding over his bare shoulder and down over his chest. She leaned into view behind him, face almost resting on his shoulder. Sena. It would appear that David is still under Sena's spell, which leads to the uncomfortable suggestion that the two of them might have had sex. If that's the case, then by all definitions, Sena raped David. David would not have been able to give his consent. Now, it's also possible that they didn't have sex, but the threat of rape is proving a consistent threat for the series. Right now, it seems that our protagonists are riding that fine line between guest and prisoner. Everyone in the castle is very nice and hospitable, but they can't leave because Merlin is coming. Sena seems very worried, and keeps the brainwashed David around as her personal bodyguard. Everyone's brought into the dining hall, where Galahad enters with his guests, the frumpy wizard Merlin and... okay, who invited Loki? Sir Gareth, tell me you didn't invite... No, it's not open house. Since when has our magic brunch been open house? Well, we can't kick him out now. So yeah, Loki is there. Loki is always there? No, sorry, that doesn't work. Doesn't have the same ring to it. Never mind. And he wants the witch Sena as much as Merlin does. Everybody sits down for a meal, including Loki, and everybody acts very polite at first. But there's a bubbling tension, like the tavern scene from Inglourious Bastards. At some point, someone's gonna snap, and the shooting's gonna start. We do get to see Sena and Merlin interact, and it helps sell home the power dynamics in play here. "I don't believe we've met," she said. "My name is Sena Wales." She reached out a hand to shake his. Merlin's mouth twitched in a fleeting smile. He stepped forward and took her hand, held it. Gently, not squeezing, not threatening, just a courtly old man taking any young woman's hand. Sena's eyes drooped, lids half closed. Merlin stared straight at her. The moment dragged on and on. Then, with a gasp, Sena pulled away. "Don't waste your trickery on me, Enchantress," Merlin said. "I was casting spells 1,000 years before you were born." Sena was shaking. She looked at her hand like it had turned into a snake. Maybe it had, at least in her eyes. This little moment is very important because up to this point, we had no sense of scale as to how powerful Sena really was. She was clearly magical and threatening to the scrubs that are our four protagonists, but now we know that she's small potatoes, at least in comparison to Merlin. So how Merlin interacts with figures like Galahad and Loki will help us understand how powerful they are. While it's not a scientific scale, it's a good first step in recognizing the various hierarchies within Everworld and providing the reader with some greater context. Speaking of context, pleasantries between everybody starts to break down. Loki demands Galahad hand over Sena, that she is his by rights of conquest, but Galahad refuses, and through their arguments we finally get a solid explanation as to everything that's going on. I mean, yeah, we've already pieced together like 95% of it through clues and overheard conversations, but now it's laid bare. Ka-Anor is an alien god, like from actual outer space, because who said Earth has to have a monopoly on gods? He's a god of the insectoid Hetwan, and he literally eats Earth gods for breakfast. And the surviving pantheon in Everworld is scared shitless. While Sena might not be powerful enough to pull one over Merlin, she still has the seemingly unique ability to pass over between the real world and Everworld, and Loki wishes to use her as a portal for a mass exodus out of Everworld, bringing the old gods back into our modern society. Merlin gets up in Loki's face. If Loki had just listened to him the first time, if all the gods and wizards had gotten over themselves, teamed up, and faced Ka-Anor head-on, they could have beat him. But now there's more infighting than ever. Some of the big hitters like Thor are missing in action. Loki's sending Vikings to fight Aztecs for no good reason, ruining their chances for a collective army. Loki doesn't like being told he's an idiot, and he doesn't like being told no, so he becomes a giant and a huge fight breaks out. Galahad draws his sword, his loyal knights come to his side, and we get to see Merlin in action. Now, anyone who's played Dungeons & Dragons knows that you can't just be a wizard, you have to specialize in a specific school of magic. So, what school does Merlin belong to? Merlin stood apart and held up his hands as if praying. In a clear, forceful voice, he said, "Death to life, life to slaughter. Arise, arise, beasts of the forest. Arise, beasts of the field. Arise, beasts of the air. Forget your nature and become the wolf to kill a wolf. And then the wild boar, the tusked pig with its ribs stripped bare and its insides long since eaten, kicked its legs. Ah! I cried. The boar rolled over, stood on tiny hooves, and ran down the table towards Loki. And not alone. All the dead creatures, pigs, birds, sheep, and goat, all sprang into hideous life, crisp skin crackling, blackened bone rasping, empty eye sockets gaping. Up they came, up from the platters, clattered over their own discarded bones, and rushed at the Norse god. Merlin's a goddamn necromancer! He takes all the dead animals everyone's been eating and sicks them on Loki, which is more of a distraction than anything else, but still damn impressive. Our four protagonists and Santa take this opportunity to escape, getting out of the castle and out into the crops of Galahad's kingdom, only to discover that Loki has brought a bunch of trolls with him. Everyone gets separated, April manages to fend off some trolls by setting a wheat field on fire, and eventually gets picked up by Galahad on horseback. His castle lost to Loki, who's grown King Kong size and is wrecking up the place. Everybody regroups in the ruins of an old tower. Many of Galahad's men have died. Merlin burned up a lot of energy keeping Loki at bay, and Galahad is having a quiet existential crisis. See, Galahad lives kind of a storybook existence. He goes around saving damsels and slaying dragons. He's been doing that for at least 1,000 years, as it seems people in Everworld are ageless, if not outright immortal. However, if he had just let the dragon take Santa, had let Merlin carry on with his plans, none of this would have happened. His codes of chivalry have resulted in the ruination of his kingdom. But even more than that, the presence of these outsiders, of people from Galahad's original world, brings questions to the nature of his own existence. Just what is he? Outside of his longevity, his eternal youth, he doesn't appear to be a magical being like Merlin or the gods. What does it mean to be Galahad? You were Lancelot's son? Christopher said. Galahad looked puzzled. You speak as though I were already gone. Have you had a vision? Christopher seemed embarrassed. A first for him, maybe. No, man, no, it's just, you're history to us. Like you happened a long time ago. Galahad searched Christopher's face, deepening his embarrassment. And then slowly, hesitantly, he asked, was I real? In your world, in the old world, was I more than a legend, more than a tale? Was I a man? I don't know, Christopher said. My memories are... I remember bits and pieces. My mother, the Lady Elaine. I remember the sword in the stone. He shook his head. No, not Arthur's sword, another. I remember taking my seat in the Siege Perilous, the seat that would kill all pretenders but me. I know of my great quest for the Grail. Though even there I am confused, for Gawain recalls the same quest, as though we are two men doing the same deed. But there are so many gaps, so many missing pieces. Let's go back a bit and talk about April's relation to art, or rather the relation all our characters have to art. We discussed the use of pop culture references in this series last time, but let's expand that a bit. The three narrators we've had so far have had some ties to art. David was all about music. He complained about the music available on his car radio, he had several band t-shirts, including one for Radiohead, and music played a crucial role in his book. Christopher loves televised sitcoms, seeing them as a major inspiration for his humor, and he uses them as escapism. April is all about the theater and film. She takes her fellow theater actors on dates to see old foreign movies. She makes references to Groucho Marx and The Iceman Cometh. For some, this all may seem to be an excessive amount of references, but something to consider is the nature of fantasy itself. This is largely a generalization, but I think it's safe to say that if science fiction is about looking towards the future and creating ideas from that, then fantasy is about looking towards the past and creating ideas from that. Your classic fantasy iconography is derived from a combination of pre-industrial history and the myths, legends, folk tales, and religious texts of times long ago, remixed and repurposed for modern entertainment. Lord of the Rings is a mix of Norse mythology, Middle English literature, and Catholic doctrine. Elves and dwarves are German, dragons are Greek, everything feeds into everything. All that matters is the ratio. Since these elements in fantasy are either legend or involves people who are long dead, our relationship to these stories and histories is through our relationship with its art. We read the Odyssey, we see paintings of King Arthur, we listen to hymns, we watch Shakespeare. These mythologies are built up through the arts. These arts aren't really all that different from the art we make today, just distanced with time. Everworld postulates the idea that, instead of these being separated by time, these arts are separated by distance or dimension. Everworld represents the old arts, and our protagonists, steeped in modern media, represent the new arts. What's more, the reason Galahad has a spotty memory, the reason there seems to be multiple people who claim the Holy Grail, was because in our world, the existing legend of Galahad has multiple conflicting versions. It seems that our modern perception of legends has some effect on the reality of Everworld. If that's the case, then that reframes the real world and our protagonists from it. Despite the great danger to their lives while in Everworld, our four heroes are as much alien invaders as Ka-Anor. But while Ka-Anor eats gods directly, the real world seems to be eliminating them in a much more subtle and slow way, by forgetting them. So, camp. While everyone's getting ready for Loki's inevitable attack, our protagonists are trying to figure out what their goals are. Outside of being forcibly enchanted, the main reason any of them are willing to help Sena is because she's the only one who can get them home, presumably. April demands hard evidence of that fact, so Sena obliges by drawing April into her body and giving her a glimpse of the real world. It seems that she is physically the gateway. She doesn't just create the portal, she is the portal. April is drawn back into Everworld. "You disappeared into her body," Jalil said tersely. "The upper part of your body just kind of merged into her. Your body, your legs, and butt and all were just sticking out of her." He sounded weird. Easy to understand. "Incidentally, I have a new fetish." So Loki and his troll army attack the camp, and a lot of stuff happens. David actually steps up his game by cutting down trees with the knife enhanced by the coup hatch, and creates barricades that allow archers to take down trolls point blank. Galahad gets seriously injured, and April comes up with a way to do a blood transfusion using the ink cartridge of a pen they brought over. See, she knows all about this stuff because she's playing Mimi in Rent, and Mimi knows about needles because Mimi is a junkie. Yeah, sorry, no, I'm really not buying it. "I will have a woman's blood in my veins, in my heart," Galahad grumbled. "I will no longer be a man." "Yeah, that's pretty much how it works," I snapped. "You get female blood and your willy falls off." He looked worried. So did Merlin. However, it doesn't seem to matter because Loki's forces overrun the camp. Most of Galahad's men are killed. Loki takes the time to gloat, but Merlin has one last trick up his sleeve. Loki is now within the ruined walls of the tower, and using his mad necromancy skills, he manages to restore the tower around the god, temporarily trapping him. And then Merlin's dragon shows up, flying through the roof and spitting hot justice. Fire breath isn't enough to kill Loki, but it hurts him pretty badly, and gives our protagonist an avenue for escape. Sena goes missing, she ran off on her own, but the four manage to drag Galahad out, only to run into that dragon. See, the dragon is not here for altruistic reasons. He's a hired gun, paid by Merlin, and he's completed his part of the bargain. He's no longer bound by contract. And here is Galahad, slayer of dragons, weak and unable to fight. April and the rest are unable to do anything as the dragon burns Galahad to death. The dragon leaves, Loki is gone, Merlin is gone, Sena is gone. They bury what remains of Galahad. David claims Galahad's sword, they make camp and go to sleep, waking up in the real world. It seems like they're back to square one, but April gets to thinking. Loki will not stop until he has Sena. And if he has Sena, Everworld is going to pour into our world. Ancient gods, monsters, magics, pouring into Chicago circa 1999. That is not good. That could be outright apocalyptic. Meaning the game has changed. This is no longer about them getting home. This is about them stopping Loki. And to stop Loki, they have to deal with Ka-Anor. They don't have a clue how to do that, but at least they finally have a goal to work towards. Follow-up. Everworld number 3, Enter the Enchanted, does some much needed heavy lifting for the series. First up, while she has her own hang-ups, April is a far more decent human being than David and Christopher. And while she doesn't have much of a positive outlook either, she isn't actively adding to their problems. She's a much needed palate cleanser after 2 very unpleasant narrators. She's more competent than the 2 of them, she's more naturally heroic than the 2 of them. Her actions are not done out of ego and pride, but out of just trying to do what's right. For the record, April is my personal favorite of the 4. She's very well written, she has a lot of realistic depth, and her relationship to Sana means she's more tied to the plot than the others. While David tries to act as a hero and the leader of the team, April is much more competent and better at seeing the big picture. Speaking of, this book also does us a service by cementing the conflict, developing the power structures involved, and giving our characters an actual goal to work towards. These first 3 books are mostly about 4 teenagers getting dragged around against their will, taken from place to place, from danger to danger, and barely surviving. While there'll still be plenty of dragging around to be done, our protagonists now have something to accomplish, even if they don't have the first clue how to accomplish it. Bringing Loki back at this part of the book was pretty smart. Up until then, the series was more or less about going from zone to zone like some kind of ancient fantasy theme park. First, we'll visit Viking land, then go to Aztec land, and then it's off to medieval Europe land. Bringing in Loki at this point cements him as a primary antagonist, not just the god from Viking land, and his conflict with Galahad and his men show off just how massive of a threat Loki can be. It can be argued that Book 3 is a bit late to be nailing down these ideas. We're now 25% done with the series and are only now just getting to the central conflict, and I wouldn't entirely disagree. I still think leading the series with the 2 most unpleasant protagonists was a mistake, and if my comments are anything to go by, it turned some people off, and they dropped the series after the 2nd book. If you had made this story the 2nd book and shifted the Aztec stuff for later, the series would have held more readers, I think. But I guess it's better than holding off until book 4. There's no skipping books. Everworld has a very tight continuity. I can't say things like, well, you don't have to read number 39 Hidden if you don't want to. Just know that, if you find the first 2 books extremely unpleasant, it does get better. Will it keep getting better from here? We shall see.